It is the podcast report, and it has been way too long. My friend and podcast coach, Dave Jackson, texts me and says, Paul, it's been a year. And Dave was right. And I figured the only legitimate, the only real, the only honest way to relaunch the podcast report would be a catch up with Dave. So Dave, how you doing, buddy?
Good, man. It's nice to hear your voice.
It's nice to hear your voice. It has been a long time. For those of you who don't know who Dave Jackson is, and there's like 2 or 3 somewhere, Dave, just give a 30 seconds about who you are and what it is that you do.
Dave Jackson, I run the School of Podcasting, and for fun, I work for Libsyn.
And what do you do in the Libsyn division?
I am the part of the tech support team. So when you say, hey, I just published my show and I don't see it in Apple, I'm the guy that answers that ticket.
And for my clients, when I say I got a guy at Libsyn, meet Dave. So anyway, and Rob and Elsie and everybody else, but still. So Dave, it's been a year for podcasting. What do you think the number one story of the year is? Let's just pretend it's the end of 2020 and we're talking, between August 1st of last year and today, what's the number one story in podcasting?
It's one word. It's Spotify.
And how so?
Because every time you turn around, they just bought somebody else. 2 people that I've never heard of, but when you see the actor, you go, oh, that guy. They just keep buying more stuff. And I understand, or at least I hope so, that somehow they're making some profit somewhere, because they're spending lots of money on lots of things, whether it's Gimlet or Anchor, or I'm trying to think of the last thing they just bought. The sports guy, Bill Simmons.
They keep buying stuff. Yep.
Yeah. And every time you turn it, I'm like going, okay, but they are making money somewhere, right? So it's just interesting. And now, and of course, there's that one guy, what's his name? Joe something. Yeah. They gave him a lots of money to not be on YouTube and things like that. So that's going to be fun to watch. That was another one that was a lot of money. And every time you turn, like I said, I don't know who it's so-and-so and so-and-so. And every time you turn around, Spotify is giving somebody lots of money to produce content on their stuff, to which Apple has announced, oh, we have a show too. They're starting some sort of Apple only thing. So people are starting to wall off the gardens thinking that will work. Meanwhile, Luminary is bleeding money. And almost, there are people that are jumping off that ship as we speak. So, but a lot of it.
Speak to Luminary, because a lot of people know Spotify because they think that's what their kids listen to. But for those who don't know, what's Luminary, Dave?
Yeah, Luminary was an app that first of all came out in a let's put it this way. Some people took it as condescending, kind of like, hey, we're here now, and we have all these big shot smarty pants people. The guy from The Daily Show, although he has his own free podcast, and the British guy that's real funny, and he looks like Jesus. I forget his name. He had a podcast, bunch of other names. And at first I thought, oh, this is going to be interesting, because it sounded like it was going to be an app with about 7 podcasts in it. So you don't have to worry about finding them. There's only 7. And I thought this would be interesting to watch. But instead, they brought everybody's podcast in. And I want to say it was originally $8 a month, $7 a month, something like that. It wasn't a ton, but when there are, 800,000 other shows to listen to for free, unless that's a really, really good show, not everybody was scrambling to pay Luminary for this. And from what I've heard from different shows, they are bleeding money like nobody's business. And there's been, I know at least one, I want to say 2 shows that apparently their contract is up. And they're kind of like, hey, this whole thing where, you gave us a really big check, which was nice, but in the meantime, nobody's listening to our stuff because nobody's signing up. They are jumping ship. So it's going to be interesting to see, because that is an idea. That's a strategy of we're going to make a walled garden with really big names, and that one didn't work. So either the names weren't big enough, or somebody said, Trevor Noah, the guy from The Daily Show, he has a show on there, but he also has a show that's not on Luminary. Well, okay, so if I can get Trevor Noah for free, why would I pay $8 to, unless he's doing something really, really brilliant there? So,
well, whenever I've always said, don't count on the crazy money, but if somebody writes you the check, cash it.
Exactly.
So good on Trevor, good on and even Mr. Rogan himself. Like I don't blame him for cashing that check. But what's interesting here is Spotify gets the attention. Yes. Spotify gets the lip service and the press, and I'm sure you've been contacted like I have by these advisors who are trying to figure out where the money is and all this, and so you get to do that consulting and that kind of stuff. But the thing is it going to affect podcasting at all? And it's funny because I remember a while ago when another popular loud white guy who offended a lot of people left the format that everybody got to the paid format. Howard Stern, everybody thought it was going to be the end of radio and it was going to be Sirius XM. And your Sirius XM monthly bill is what, Dave?
Actually, and after being gone for many years, I just resubscribed. So it's $15.
Okay. So Dave's paying. So Dave Jackson doesn't mind paying for audio.
Now ask me how much I listen.
Well, it doesn't matter really. When it comes down to it, Dave Jackson doesn't mind paying for audio. Do you have a music subscription?
Yeah, I pay for Spotify. So there's how they're paying for Joe Rogan.
Right, exactly. So the fact of the matter is people pay for audio. That's not the question. Audible's been around forever. I've known Don over at Audible since 2000. That's a whole nother story. They've been getting people to pay for audio. Mignon Fogarty, Grammar Girl, when they took her podcast, they made it an audiobook at Audible. It was the #1 book at Audible for like 3 months. So people will pay for audio. So this idea that people will pay for audio isn't the right idea. The question is, will people pay for podcasts? Now, I remember I was 7 years old. I remember it clearly. I went over to Daryl's house, my buddy Daryl. Daryl always had the cool toys and the cool things. And you know what Daryl told me? There was this thing they had called Hibbo. And Hibbo was this special TV that didn't have commercials. And that struck me as really weird. But HBO. HBO had movies, Dave. And this is before VCRs and before that kind of stuff. And it was like, and I went over to Daryl's house and I watched King Kong, the same King Kong that we had paid money to go see in the movie theater. I saw it at Daryl's house. And not Hall & Oates Daryl, but Daryl Sprague's house. And the funny thing was like, well, how do I do this? What channel is this on? And Daryl looks at me and says, you got to pay for it. And I go, pay for TV? That's stupid. Nobody pays for TV. That's why you don't get King Kong.
Right.
So, a couple years later, I'm now paying a couple years later, from 77 to 2020, a couple years later, I'm paying $65 a month to get my YouTube TV that I could also get if I hook, the majority of the stations, if I just hooked up rabbit ears and, bought a $50 tuner. But so paying for content, paying for audio, that people do, and that you and I do, and all the prognosticators who say that this is a bad thing, they all do. So that's not the problem. The question is, what makes podcasting so special and so weird in this game, or does it? Or are people just special snowflakes who've gotten their feelings hurt? What's the situation, Dave?
That's a good question, because the reason I just signed up for Apple Plus was I wanted to see the Tom Hanks movie.
Right.
And now that I've seen the Tom Hanks movie and I binged through the morning show, I'm about done with Apple Plus. I was like, oh,
watch For All Mankind. That's pretty good. But then, that's one more weekend and then you're done.
Yeah. So I was kind of like, I don't know what it is. I think it was $5, something like that. But I just remember thinking, and I just canceled my HBO Now because, here's the fun thing with all this, lovely pandemic stuff. They're not making any new shows.
Yeah.
So I'm waiting for the seasons to come back and I'm like, oh, you know what? They're not. So I was like, I'm just noticing that I'm not watching much. And I think, Paul, your Netflix special comes out next month, right? Because everybody's getting one. Sure. Yeah. And it's like, so it makes, because on one hand, it reminds me a little bit of music. Like people used to pay for music.
Right.
At times
but I
a
do
lot.
Now. I pay for Apple Music.
Yeah. I'm going to say I pay for Spotify.
Right.
But that's also why concert tickets have gone up, because you used to make, a lot of money on a CD, and now you're making, couch cushion change if you have somebody listen to your whole CD. So I wonder if it's a value thing where, because podcasts are free, people, and I mean, in the early days, you mentioned Audible. In the early days of podcasting, they tried. Ricky Gervais had a show, and everybody was kind of like, why would I pay for these? So
in episode 14 of the School of Podcasting, you and I talked about my Premium Cast product.
Yeah.
That made premium podcasting possible, which, by the way, funny enough, I'm looking at relaunching it. That's a whole nother story, but yeah,
there's a bunch of those now. They're all coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah. So, and then what gets funny is a lot of people are like, the debaters love to say, if it's not an Apple podcast, it's not a podcast.
Right.
Therefore, what Joe Rogan's doing in January is not a podcast. And that's all fine and dandy in the standing your groin standpoint. But you know what? I think when Rogan takes the check to the bank to cash, I don't think the teller is going to go, that you're not really a podcast. We cannot accept this money.
That's it. Well, and that's the other thing that I'm seeing more people that, again, sticking with that now YouTube is a podcast. And technically, there's no RSS feed, but I remember many moons ago when I was in marriage counseling, and if your wife thinks that you don't spend enough time with her, it doesn't matter if you can say, but look, I just spent 17 hours straight with you. If she still feels neglected, guess what? She feels neglected. So if the audience that's listening thinks YouTube is a podcast, guess what? YouTube's a podcast. So
last year at Podcast Expo, the physical one.
Yeah. I remember those.
Mutual friend of this, Tom Webster chatted about, did you see that presentation?
I will probably remember it when you mentioned it.
What was funny was, so Tom Webster, he runs our VP of Edison Research. They do exit polling U.S. elections, high integrity firm, high budget firm. They have the ability to do it right. My degree was in political science. I did some surveying, polling classes. I know what you're supposed to do, and I know that they do it right. They did this thing on newbies versus veterans, and right. Veterans was like people have been listening to podcasts for more than a couple of years. Newbies was less than 6 months, and it was interesting how they were different and things like the newbies. A lot of them go to Spotify by default. The veterans were old school Apple, that kind of thing. But what was interesting was, and again, they had the money to do this, and you know how it is. You get, the newbie says something, the veteran says something, the newbie says something, the veteran says something, and the veteran kept talking about Dirty John, Dirty John, Dirty John, Dirty John, and then the newbie kept talking about Nurse Chris, Nurse Chris, Nurse Chris. Is this ringing a bell at all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so so basically, long story short, this newbie who loved the Nurse Chris podcast, and Nurse Chris, a machine, right. A multi-million-dollar machine. There is no Nurse Chris podcast. This newbie just thought it was, and so, yeah. So if you think it's a podcast, it is a podcast. I tell the joke about my mom still won't play with Apple because, she thinks it's too complicated. You ask her for son will buy her one. She says, no, it's too complicated. Yet on her Kindle Fire, she has iHeartRadio. And I tell Mom I'm on that. And she goes, no, you're not. That's just for radio. And if I try to tell Mom that I'm on that, her eyes get big and she goes, you're on radio? Like I finally made it. So that's not it. So why is there any benefit? Let me ask it this way. Is there any benefit in the industry for the podcasters to be arguing and complaining about whether or not Joe Rogan is really a podcast when he's on Spotify?
No, I think the only reason that comes up is people are worried, and I'm not quite sure why, that if we have enough of these shows that aren't using an RSS feed, that RSS will go away. And I don't know that that's something we need to worry about. Like when we start seeing a lot of, like when there are still, 1 million plus that are using an RSS feed and we have 4 that aren't.
Right.
I'm not really sure it's time to ring the panic bell yet.
And this is the podcast report. Many of you are nerds, but many of you are not. RSS is what makes podcasting happen. No RSS, no podcast. The best explanation of the problem with Spotify, and the thing is, I think what you're saying, Dave, is it's the problem with Spotify, not necessarily the problem with and Spotify's of the world. It's not necessarily the RSS; it's what it could do. Merlin Mann, who I respect tremendously, got to meet once briefly. Merlin spoke to Spotify as, and I thought this was an interesting idea, as if Spotify was Walmart, who goes into a town, spends all the money, does all the flash, builds the big building, runs everybody else out of business, and then decides that particular store wasn't worth it and leaves the store a ghost town. I think the fear was that, Spotify or the big names would do that. And, because if they get all the press, if they get all the attention, I mean, the problem with podcasting, and let's chat about the Podcast Academy in a minute. The problem with podcasting is because it has no champion, because it has no event, because it has no specific person associated with it, there's no place we can go. The best we can do for podcasting really is go to an Apple store and ask how to do it, and they're not even necessarily that great there. Somebody wants to own it. Somebody wants, and Spotify wants to act like, the good podcaster at Spotify. That makes sense from a marketing standpoint. So Podcast Academy pops up, Dave. Podcast Academy says, we're going to be here for you. We're going to do this. We're going to be the ones. We're going to make this happen. You and I were sitting next to each other when that announcement was made at Podcast Movement. Thoughts on the Academy? Have you joined officially?
I have officially joined. I have seen where they're going to create awards. Okay. And I know they're having some webinars. I did see that. I haven't logged in a bunch. I think I've logged in like 2 or 3 times. So shame on me for not really going back to seeing and keeping in touch with what's going on. And I know they've sent out a couple emails. So they're new. They're getting their feet wet. It should be interesting to it's another one where I have popped the popcorn. I'm ready to sit back and watch. And again, if they ask for my opinion or things like that, we shall see. But the biggest difference,
video that I took illegally of you giving your opinion. We won't be broadcasting that.
The fun thing is there have been 2 other groups that have tried this. Like, we're going to be the independent podcast, blah, 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 whatever it is. And it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of money. And those groups did not have either of those. And both of them eventually went down the tubes. So this group has money. One would assume they have time, or at least they have the staff or can buy the staff to help. So this one has, at least from an outsider's point of view, more tools to get it off the ground and fly. Now, where's it going? We're not sure. But so that's the part that I'm like, well, this should be, again, it's one of those sorts like, well, this could work. Maybe we'll see, and I know the current group of leadership, according to Rob Greenlee, who's the chair of some sort of board, and he's a voice in there. I want to say it's 2 years. After 2 years, you have to leave the board and they vote in more people so that it's not this just group of whoever. So if you hate where they're going and things like that, I don't know I'm assuming I would get to vote who's going in, because as a member, right, that would make sense. So we'll see what happens. Right now they're just trying to still get it off the ground. What are your thoughts on it?
First of all, $50 to join right now. Like, I've thrown $50 at far less. I do want them to succeed.
Yeah,
absolutely. I tried to sign up and it was confusing. And I'm not the type who, like, it's just the way my mind works. And probably this is why I've gone to marriage counseling, is because my mind works this way. But if there's not clear directions, I kind of get trapped. And a lot of people are like, oh, just click the buttons until you get to the end. Just join. Just don't worry about it, kind of thing. But I got trapped in the nuances of it. And then it's funny because as I've waited, it's become less and less paperwork's involved. And I'm like wondering soon. And like I saw today, there's something like you can now give who's the guys who want to be the IMDb of podcasting?
Podchaser.
Podchaser. Yeah. Apparently you can give Podchaser $50 now and they'll make you a member without having to go through anything. So apparently it's getting much easier, and I'll probably do it. And, for the uninitiated, hey, I'm a member of the Podcast Academy, la-di-da-di-da.
You do get a logo to put on your website. So.
Right. But again, like, I can give you a logo to put on your website, and I'll only charge you $25.
Google Images, I can get one right now.
Exactly. So it's just an interesting space. So Spotify comes up, eats up a bunch of people. We should probably talk about Anchor, and we'll probably have to talk about Anchor through the lens of, you do pay some of your bills through a company who charges for what Anchor gives away for free. For those of you not watching the video of this, I put that in air quotes. Let's talk about Anchor. So Anchor got big. Anchor got bought. Anchor's got a lot of attention.
Right.
Anchor, for the uninitiated, Anchor is the pitch is actually a pretty cool pitch. We want to be to podcasting what YouTube was to online video. Sign up for free, non-exclusive. We do everything, great software, that kind of thing, great concept. And it's funny because a lot of the things they've done, they've either done out of a evil desire to take over the planet or just out of complete ignorance. Right. And it's funny because they don't understand the way things work. My favorite one, and this is the one that still exists to this time, RSS, which we chatted about easier. One of the hearts of RSS is there's an email associated with that. And that's how you do your communication of things is here's my email address. Well, they own the email address. And so the big sponsor comes to you, wants to contact you, or somebody they contact you. It's their email address. And not only is it necessary, we don't necessarily know if it just goes into a big pot somewhere and just dies.
Well, here's the thing that confuses me about Anchor is they will come up and punch you in the face and then go, oh, and if you need it, here's a bag of here's some frozen peas to put on your chin. Like right. You can go in now. And this is where I kind of give them credit, but it's like, hey, look, we gave you a bag of peas to put on your face after we punched you, because they now have the ability to show your email in the feed. So they fixed that problem.
Oh, they fixed that. Okay.
The thing that still drives me nuts, and my biggest problem is they will say, we will submit your podcast for you, in quotation marks, to all the places, not telling them that, by the way, there's extra stats in Apple that you're not going to get. There's extra stats in Stitcher that you're not going to get. In fact, in Stitcher, I don't think they submit to Stitcher anymore. Stitcher probably said, hey, you're making us more work, because these people, once they leave, went to Stitcher and like, hey, we got to get that thing back. I asked the guys at Apple, I go, is this not making you more work? And if you let them submit to Google Podcast, again, you lose that stuff. So what they did is, there a thing now, if you turn on the feature to show my email address, not the Anchor one, there's a new feature where you can put in, because Apple's going to say, look, you have to prove you're the owner of the feed. Put this gibberish in your feed. Anchor made a box to put the gibberish.
Oh, so they've done both now. Okay.
So they made it easier to get back the feed that they stole from you. And I was just like, why not steal the feed? But so they're getting better, but there are a lot of people there that still think, I'm going to get paid from day one.
Right.
Yes, you are. And to the best of my knowledge, I've asked many people this. What sponsors have you gotten on Anchor? And the answer is it's one sponsor, and that sponsor is Anchor. Yeah. And you get about a penny a download. And so the one thing that's supposed to be making the money selling ads against your content is actually losing them more money, but not a lot, because my favorite is, I just did a roundup of podcast about podcasting, which we were on. And there was one like podcast consultant or something like that. And it was on Anchor, and there was one episode, and that was it. And I was like, there's just so much in that kind of screenshot of like, here's somebody that went to Anchor, did one episode, and went, yeah, never mind.
Yeah. So Anchor is there. So Anchor now, so the majority of the traditional complaints about Anchor are kind of gone.
Some of them.
What's left in the big complaints?
The whole, they submit your show and don't tell you. That's the big
one. I took a show and I was able to preemptively say, don't submit, I'll submit.
Right. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I did that, but I did that with an email address that they owned. So I submitted a show, and the show was called Paul's on Anchor. Is this a good idea? And
well, that's the thing is, and again, I'm not sure they're doing this to be evil.
Right.
Their whole goal is it's easy. Look, you just talk into your phone and you show up in Apple, but they're not letting people know, oh, by the way, when you do this, there is a potential side effect. They're just like, no, it's just easy. Just press record and it'll go. Right. And it's the people later. And that's why when they first came out, they drove me nuts, because I was the guy that had to be the bad guy and deliver the bad news. Oh no, they own your show. And they're like, what? Yeah. So that's what drove me nuts. For a good solid month, all I did was clean up Anchor messes.
And what was funny was I saw Anchor as like the other thing, I mean, it's a nice app. It's a nice app. And one of the things I've done in quarantine is probably a really bad idea. Is I've signed up for all of the Facebook groups about podcasting. So that was a mistake. And someone asked about Anchor, like the typical I use Anchor question, and it was funny because the guy's thing was, Anchor's great, but their software sucks, or something like that. I'm like,
wow.
That's one I haven't seen, So Anchor exists. Anchor got bought by Spotify. They're still called Anchor. There's a way to make a free podcast. If you're really super crazy diligent, you could build it there and move it somewhere else.
Right.
Pros and cons to that is to be asked. The thing about YouTube that the comparison to YouTube that they don't get, and this is the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand. YouTube announced Social Media Marketing World in this year, actually, the last thing I went to before this shutdown. They officially announced that 3 out of every 4 videos at YouTube, 75% of all videos at YouTube come from, if you like this video, you like this video. So there is something to be said that if I were to want to become famous as a podcast teacher, I could make a bunch of videos, that looked, that were in the same school of podcasting videos. And then, I could leverage Dave's name and fortune, to bring people over to me. But we don't have that in podcasting. So the whole free part doesn't necessarily make sense, and there are paid plans that are as low as $5, it's just an interesting thing. And I do love the person who will buy, who will wait to buy the extended version of the new MacBook Pro because they need the extra memory, and they need the better screen. And then they'll spend 5 months debating, which $900 microphone they should buy. And then, then they'll go, why should I pay for hosting? That's a classic question mark in my mind.
Yeah. $15. Boy, I don't know. That's crazy talk. Well, that, and again, comparing it to YouTube makes money by placing ads, right. And now in the middle for no apparent reason, even if you didn't put it there.
You've seen man, I wonder if I could bring up this. It wouldn't work on the audio version. So I have a new slide deck, Dave. It's so much fun. So first screen, it's got the YouTube logo and it's got a $sign. How does YouTube make its money?
Ads. And
YouTube makes its money by selling your audience to your competition. Next screen's got the Facebook logo with the $sign. How does Facebook make money? Facebook makes money by selling your audience to your competition. The next slide is Instagram. How does Instagram make money? By selling your audience to your competition. The last one is Apple. How does Apple make money? By selling iPhones. Which is different.
Yeah.
Which is different. And it's something that I think needs to be examined. All right. So Spotify's big news. People moving over to walled garden type of situations is big news. Anchor is big news. Podcast Academy, some could say, is big news. A lot of the podcasting conferences, I mean, pretty much they've all fallen down, right? They're all virtual now, right?
Every single one. Podfest was the last one that I went to, and that was actually, I take that back. No, there was Podcast Movement Evolutions, and then there was a Christian podcast conference, and then Podfest in Orlando, and we all were kind of like, do we touch elbows? We're all kind of like not sure what to do here, and I don't know about you, but I was 14 days after that thing was over. I was very happy that I was like,
I did not go physically to Podfest.
Oh, that's right. You didn't.
I went to Social Media Marketing World. Same thing. 14 days. I was like, every cough was questioning, and then of course the big thing for me was monitor. It was Social Media Marketing World, so I figured if anybody caught it, they'd certainly talk about it on social media marketing. And apparently no results. So that's a whole thing. Yeah. So it is cool because it's funny. Podfest is not necessarily where my audience is, but what's funny is Podfest is where my friends are, and so I've always had this weird thing. And so now I'm finally able to do Podfest in a couple of weeks. I'm really excited about that. And I think that's going to be fun. I'm going to bring out one of my business ones and whatnot. And Chris has been very gracious to let me do that. And I think that's going to be a lot of fun with all the podcast events going virtual. So I've been saying, well, we'll use this one as a straight example. Okay. There's an event called Traffic and Conversion in San Diego. Takes place at the end of March, beginning of April, right? Yeah. And 10,000 people. I had a big presentation. I had a panel. I paid the money for the big booth because, 10,000 people looking to think about podcasting. Now, officially, TNC is rescheduled for December. But, we're starting to get those surveys of how would you feel if we went virtual or that kind of thing. And I think my bet is that TNC is the future for the next couple of years is going to be hybrid. Is going to be, we'll be physical, but we're also going to record the thing, When you look at, so the original proposition, and let's just use TNC as the example, not necessarily the one to hold up, but, the money to see 10,000 people face-to-face in the room, all the stuff, the chance to work with Schwarzenegger on the keynote, all that, once that goes down to 4,000 people who are scared to shake your hand, let alone go into the basement room, where your booth is, let alone be in the keynote in the closed room with everybody, let alone go to the parties, let alone go to the networking and that type of thing. Does the virtual become better? And these physical events have been fantastic, but
there's one thing that virtual shows are missing: adrenaline.
Right.
Because when I'm at Evolutions, you and I walked blocks to go to a horrible networking event, and then turn around and walk back home. But the whole time it was like, we're here. There are people here. The only way we can see them face to face. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity, is to find them here, because when we go home, we're not going to be able to talk face to face. And so it's for me, at least, I'm excited when I get there. I'm excited while it's going on, and I pretend I'm 22 and stay up till like 2 a.m. talking to people. And when I go home, I crash and burn like nobody's business. And I don't feel that when I'm on I've been on a few virtual stuff, and they're fun. There's some really cool technology out there, but it's not quite the same thing, because I can do another one the next day and the next week. And it's that kind of specialness of like, ooh, we're at the thing.
Yeah, it's not quite the same. Yeah. I agree. But what I think the number gets, I mean, you've been doing a podcaster happy hour.
Yeah.
Nowhere near as cool as a happy hour. Like sorry, Dave.
No, it's not.
I'd much rather go to a happy hour, but it's better than what I got right now. And if I had a podcaster happy hour here in Portland, even downtown, and let's not even talk about downtown Portland right now, but let's say downtown Portland was, got better, and I went to a Portland happy hour, just that drive 2 hours each way, or an hour each way. I'm in the suburbs, and and the level of people just, and the Portland podcasters are great, but I don't know if I could do virtual happy hours every Friday. Is that better than a Portland happy hour every other month? And Cheryl here says, Cheryl in Facebook says, live is live and virtual is virtual. That's absolutely true, Cheryl. And I would say, all things being said and done, live will always be better. But in this moment right now, how many virtuals is worth a live? Chris is trying to beat world. We have to be very careful how we say this. I don't know if you've been briefed on this yet, Dave, but Chris is trying to set a Guinness Book of World Records with this event, and we're supposed to be very, very careful with it. More people might see that presentation than would see it if I was at a big event, potentially. So what is the math of virtual versus physical?
Boy, that's a good question, because they are, again, if you go to a virtual event and there's only 5 people, but one of those 5 people is a client that's going to pay you a lot of money.
Yeah.
It's, and what's weird is you mentioned the happy hour. I started those because there were people that are like, I need to talk to someone above the age of 7.
Right.
I just need to, and I was like, well, let's just put this together. And I even said, we don't even need to talk about podcasting. Most of it was like, what are you watching on Netflix is what I should have named it. But it was just a place to chill out. And I quit doing them because I had other things like to do. And I've had people say like, when you bringing the happy hour back? And I'm like, really? But it's one of those things where it was just a nice place to come in and blow off steam and that whole 9 yards. But that's a good question. How many? That's a good question. How many?
So there is an event this year called the Future Congress, the Congress of Future Medical Leaders. Mm-hmm. It's an event that takes kids who are going to medical school, puts 5,000 of them in an arena, and catches them up to what the real world is about. Now, obviously, it didn't happen this year. It was virtual this year. I'll tell you, watching my senior, she's going into her senior year, watching her manipulate Zoom. Boy, it's a different world. And what's hilarious is she told me, I can't wait to go back next year. And I, great. And, the ticket's good for next year and, all that stuff. But I asked her why. It was funny. Well, I can't wait to meet all my friends. They use the back channel. They use the hashtags. They started reaching out to each other in Zoom chat. They've built this community virtually, and they can't wait to go next year to actually physically meet, which I think is hilarious. I don't, it's funny. People ask me, I run the podcast partnership. I make my living in podcast consulting and podcast production. I don't have a single Oregon customer. And so it's hilarious. People go like, how did COVID affect you? It really didn't in production. Did in marketing because I would go to big events and market and that kind of thing.
Right.
But next week I got Hollywood branded. 2 weeks after that, I've got Chris's event. I've got Podfest, Guinness Book of World Records. I've got We Are Podcast the week after that. I don't know. Maybe this is the beginning of something better.
Well, I host a little local Northeast Ohio meetup, and it's been great for me because I've been having guest speakers from all over the place that normally are not going to fly to Ohio to come talk to 12 people, but they'll get on Zoom for 45 minutes to come in and talk about whatever they want to talk about. And so that's definitely a plus, and we're having more people show up, which is weird because literally the meetings were typically 10 to 15 minutes from somebody's house. But the fact that I can go to the meeting in my pajamas now, there are people showing up that wouldn't show up before. So that's a bonus.
Yeah, no. So we'll, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier. Yeah, nobody's making shows, right? Like you think it's bad right now, when we're on the other side of this and they're finally making shows, but none are done, and we're waiting for it. I think that's going to be interesting. Is this going to be podcasting's big moment? Are we going to be the ones to actually provide the entertainment while we wait for Hollywood to catch up? Because by the way, this pandemic's a little longer than that writer's strike of a couple of years.
Well, I did just see a promo for a new TV show that is some sort of reality celebrities, he said in quotation marks, that are doing almost like the ice bucket challenge kind of stuff.
Right.
And it's for charity. And it just looked like, hey, we got a bunch of, again, celebrities to get on TV and do wacky stuff.
Right.
And I was like, that's what we're going to, okay.
Yeah. That'll last a little while. That'll last a little while.
And I am old school enough to, yes, I hold in my hand a DVD envelope from Netflix, because I don't know, because I never canceled it, but it's one of those where I would go in every Tuesday, look at the new releases and go, oh yeah, go ahead and send that to my house. Save me a trip to the Red Box. And, that list is getting weirder and weirder because there's no new movies. I'm like, well, I guess I could rent this old, whatever, Robert Redford from 1978. I've never seen that movie. I've heard a lot about it, kind of stuff. So it's going to be a bit of a drought. It'll be interesting to see. And then you also have more celebrities. Demi Moore is now doing a podcast called, I think it's Dirty Diana. And why? Because
everything. Can. And somebody wrote a big check.
Somebody wrote a big check. We can still produce podcasts because you can do a podcast and not get anywhere near anybody. All you need is a microphone and a voice and record it. And we'll do it on Zoom and, Squadcast and put all the stuff together and voila, instant content. So maybe we'll see more celebrity podcasts.
Yay.
Yeah. I still remember the Kathy Lee Gifford podcast. It was not. Yeah. No, thank you.
I think what's going to be, it's really going to be fun to see what comes out on the other side of this. Like the shows that we listen to and watch because we had nothing left, when the other guys come back to replace, are we going to replace, or are we going to stay with what we know? I think that's going to be really, really interesting. And I think what we want, I think, might change fairly dramatically as well, and it's just going to be, we're going to be at an interesting time. So what are people in the school of podcasting? What are the big, Dave, teach me how to, what are people looking for in that space?
The fun thing now, if somebody signs up, getting a microphone, usually, go over to Amazon and get yourself a Samson Q2U or a Audio Tech, and all the microphones are like out of stock. And so you're like, oh, well, that's a little different. So that's, something that's, I like, for a while, B&H had Samson Q2Us, and now they don't. So that's kind of one of the things I'm doing is I'm constantly checking, oh, no, they're over at Amazon now. Okay, now you got to go to BSW, because different shipments come in. So that's going to be interesting to watch. We have some people that are, like, I have a guy that does the Tourpreneur, was going gangbusters. He just had his 100th episode, and it's the tour business. So his business now is kind of like how to stay afloat when you can't do tours. So that's kind of interesting. I do have a few people starting TV podcasts, and that's always a little bit of a head scratcher to me, because aren't you going to just tell me what they did? Like last night on the show, Kirk saved the day at the end of the show. I'm like, oh, okay. Trying to think what else. Everybody wants to monetize. I see that a lot in Facebook groups. They're trying to figure out, like, my favorite question is, what topic should I pick to monetize? And I'm like, boy, you cannot step off the boat in more of a wrong direction than what's the most monetizable subject. I will talk about that. It's just like, oh, not the way to start. So, and we're all looking, of course, to grow your audience. And that's the thing where I just started a podcast as a test. I've always wanted to do a local podcast. So I started one about Akron, Ohio, home of LeBron James and Devo, and found out we have a minor league basketball team that I didn't know. And then COVID hit, and I was going to go interview local businesses. And now it's kind of like, well, guess what? More people got shot this weekend, and there are protests. And so I'm kind of got that on hold. But, there are people that are diving into that. But that's, and probably I think the biggest question now is, how do I record interviews locally, or not locally, but online? So it's the Squadcast, the clean feeds, the Zoom, things of that. So that's nothing really new, just a lot of people starting a podcast because they were all home and bored. If you look at
numbers up at the school podcasting,
it's weird. I had when COVID, like when everything shut down, numbers went up. And then when everybody's paycheck went down, numbers went down a little bit. And then a lot of people like, hey, and I'm like, look, you don't have to explain. No apology needed.
Don't spend your last dollar on me.
Yeah. Go take care of your family. I'll be okay. Yeah. And now it's kind of coming back up, especially consulting was one that just went, nobody was doing one-on-one consulting. And I was like, because that's where some of my bread is buttered. But that is now slowly coming back. So things are coming back a little bit. So we shall, we'll see. But I know at my podcast reviews, Daniel has the numbers. So it's we had 2 months there where we were setting records with people just starting a podcast. Now, granted, a lot of those were on Anchor, so they're going to clutter up the place now for years, because when you're not, if it's a Blueberry, Podbean, Libsyn feed and you quit paying for it, well, eventually it gets pulled out of Apple. But if it's a free feed, when you stop not paying for it, it still sticks around. So that's another one.
I think we'll see that purge soon.
Yeah, because it's like, I think eventually that is going to cause a problem. So,
around here, it's been interesting on the consulting side. Seen, and it's almost a third. So about a third of the people we've worked with in the past I just have this vision of them in the corner of their office, rocking back and forth, sucking their thumb. The end times are near. The end times are near. And things are crazy times. And boy, there are a lot of things you got to answer before what I'm going to podcast about. So I understand them. About a third are, all right, what does this mean? What do we do differently? What do we do? But then a third, I have a client who, in the course of 4 days, she got 27 speaking engagements and training sessions canceled. 4 days, 27 of them. Her response was, well, I guess I have the time to start the podcast now.
That's it.
And I'm like, yeah, let's do this. And I'm really, really, really excited about this. And so we're doing okay. Lost a couple of customers, but and I've actually signed up 2 new customers since COVID, which is interesting because boy, the marketing deck you gave someone in February of 2020 is so meaningless right now. It isn't even funny. So I've just chopped everybody I talked to before March 13th, is kind of in a different category, but it's been interesting. But some have upped their money, some have upped their spend, some have upped their output, because of the opportunity here. And I think it's just been really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the stock market. If you have the patience to ride out the waves, it usually works out that way. So, well,
Dave, so I'm going to take a few minutes here, tell you kind of what I'm thinking about the next season of the podcast report, and I want you to give me your honest opinion, and then so we'll play both Ask the Podcast Coach as well as a little sneak peek of what's ahead. One of my favorite documents. So the last batch of episodes I did in the podcast report was all about my team clarity matrix and the 6 characters that make up a podcast, and that's done really well. And what's neat is I've seen some decent revenue taking people through the program. And I've also seen some people like, hey, I went through the program myself. Thank you. I figured things out. So that did everything it's supposed to do. Very, very happy. Another tool we have inside of the company is called this is hilarious that I'm having a hard time remembering it now. This is absolutely, oh yeah. Thank you, Dave, for that one. I'm going to pull one out right now because this is the, oh my goodness. He's stalling. Mindset scorecard. Thank you. And so
I was going to guess that.
I'm working with the folks from Strategic Coach. Nice. And what they have is they have this concept of the mindset scorecard. And the idea of the mindset scorecard is that what your mindset is in things, like that's what has to match.
That's it.
Like you said, you said earlier, man, getting into podcasting, trying to find a topic that's most monetizable won't win. Anybody who's trying to do that has a different mindset than you. And so the idea of the mindset scorecard is that know how we're working together, know what we're thinking, to go from there. So I'm going to do each topic in the mindset scorecard. I'm going to do an episode based on that. Like one of my big things is the idea of assets versus episodes. Don't create an episode, create an asset. And the model is Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry didn't create his show for whoever was doing the ads that week. He created something that lasted forever. And here we are nearly 30 years later, and he's renting his assets for $500 million to Hulu, and he gets to take it home when it's all done, which is absolutely amazing. So we're going to go through all the elements of the mindset scorecard. Each episode, we're going to hit one of those. And the great thing is they're not necessarily bad things. Like if you're doing a daily Bitcoin market update, you're not making an asset, you're making an episode. And there's no way to make a daily Bitcoin market, update with anything other than episode. So it's not that the mindset different than mine is bad. It's just that this is the mindset from by which I am working and helps identify others. So I'm going to go with 8 of my mindsets, and that's going to be the next 8 episodes. And I think that's going to be interesting. Any thoughts there?
Here, I even have sound effects for this.
The following is an opinion.
There we go.
Only an opinion. These are actual, honest first impressions.
I think it's a great idea, and here's why. I did something similar, but it was only in one episode in January. Every January, especially in January, I get the people that approach me, and they're like, I want to start a podcast, and I want to quit my job in 6 weeks. And I am not exaggerating. They want to quit their job in 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I'm like, you can open a Wendy's and not quit your day job in 6 weeks. And so I did an episode that basically said, not going to happen. Just here to tell you, I know there's always that one outlying person but that person had, a crowd when they started. There was something happened that person took off. Not going to happen. And I basically said, and if you're the person that's like, I don't know, $15 for hosting, I'm not sure if that's going to work for me. And I said, if that is the case, if that's your honest case, and I've been there going, standing at the vending machine going, Mountain Dew, gas for home, Mountain Dew, gas, right. Which I've been in that those shoes. And I said, and if $15 a month is going to kill you, you don't need a podcast.
Right.
You need a job. Yeah. And so it's not, you don't podcast now. Because my guess is if the $15 is going to break your budget, then you've probably got some family problems at home because things are a little tense there. And I really thought, number one, I'm going to have people going, how dare you poor shame people? And how dare you? But what it did by stating kind of like, hey, this is where I'm at. I didn't have anybody contact me. They're like, oh, that he's already answered my question.
Yeah.
So by doing this, what's it called again? The strategic
mindset scorecard. You're going to have people that are going to kind of grade themselves. Yeah. And then come to you and you can fine tune their card and go, oh, this is better. Yeah, let's fit it in. Determine if we have the same mindset. Because if we don't have the same mindset, we probably don't want to work together. Exactly.
One of my favorite calls ever, I had a guy that was driving from Minnesota to Atlanta. And he calls me up and I have a phone number on my website. And occasionally I will actually answer that phone. So I pick it up and I'm like, this is Dave. And he's like, Dave Jackson? And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, you answer your phone? And I'm like, on occasion, what's going on? He's like, well, I was just calling to leave you a message. I'm driving from Minnesota to Atlanta. I've been listening to you for about 5 hours now, and I don't know what I'm going to podcast about, but you're my guy. When I'm ready to go, you're my guy. So by doing that scorecard, people are going to know, okay, when I work with Paul, this is what I need to be ready to do. And so you're going to end up with a warmer lead. You're going to end up with a better educated client so that when they do come on board, you're going to be like, okay, well, let's get to work. And they're going to be able to just pick up a shovel and go because they already know the game plan. I think it's a great idea.
In theory. I had an interesting, I spoke at Vid Summit, Vid Summit. Yeah. Not VidCon, which is the business of online video. And the COO of one of my favorite clients came out as well. And we hung out a lot. Nice. And whenever the CEO of your favorite client says, "Can we hang out at an event?" the answer is yes. And I do my presentation, and it was a presentation on going to the top of iTunes, and which is one of my things, and I think we even chatted about it on your show,
right?
And it was funny. Afterwards, she says, "Hey, Paul, can I give you a bit of advice?" I said, "Yes, please." She said, "So, if we had seen this presentation before we hired you, we probably would have paid you more." I'm like, okay. And what the great was, it was a well-reviewed event. I mean, Vid Summit's a big event. You're not asked back unless you get good numbers, and so it was a good service. It was a good presentation. It was everything that the audience wanted, but it also helped solidify my position. And that's what I want to try to do. And, School Podcast, you're sort of in the same place. Like if you're going to endeavor to roll your own, here's what school looks like. And let me give you some mentalities of what it takes to go through school. And what's great is if somebody walks away going, Dave's not my guy or Paul's not my guy, that's actually a benefit to everyone.
Exactly. Because I don't want to work with the guy or the female, I don't want to work with a person that's like, hey, we're on week 4 and I'm not making any money yet.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not your guy.
Yeah.
And I would much rather figure that out sooner than later. So you can go find the person who's going to charge you, $977 for the first week and have 18 bonuses and, going to have you making money before you even sign up. And you will, look at his yacht. Probably got a yacht and a boat and, that whole 9 years. Go take his program.
Yeah, I actually have seen a lot more get rich on podcasting on Facebook lately. Maybe it's, you know what it is? You know what it is? They've always been there. It's just that because I joined all those groups, they're doing the audience matching, that kind of thing. So I see it out.
I see a lot of Facebook groups where people are doing research. They're asking these. It's like, yes. What's your biggest hurdle when it comes to podcasting? And I'm like, oh, somebody's doing some research. Okay.
I was about to do a $7 ebook. Oh, cool. Well, Dave, thank you for being the inspiration to come back. And your longevity at the School of Podcasting has always been a blast. You have the model. Earlier this year, I asked your permission, and I shared some numbers of the coupon code that you've offered in the show as the lead into the membership site, and audiences really appreciated it. I sent you that War Room video, right? Whether or not you watched it. Yeah. Okay. What number are you at on the show?
It never goes below 70. It ranges anywhere from 70 to I think 85 at one point. It's up there.
Well, no, I mean, how many downloads are you at?
Oh, down 2.5 million total.
There we go. And what episode number?
737 ish, something like that. A lot. Yeah.
So you're an inspiration. You do what needs to be done for the model and the place that you are at, and it is a blast to watch. Your friendship is dear to me. You are one of the reasons why I would go to a physical event, because I know, if anything, Dave and I will at least go hang out. And so thank you for being on this final episode of the most recent season, and launch me into the next season where we do the mindset scorecard. So should I edit out that part where I can't remember the name of it, or should we just enjoy? No. I'm going to keep the whole thing in here.
Keep it in. That's it.
Dave, give a tip so that when I introduce this episode, I'm going to go at the end of the episode. Dave gives a tip so fantastic that the entire episode was worth it. So no pressure. I'm going to stall a little bit while I'm talking here to have you come up with this tip.
All right.
But we're going to end with this tip. And then when you're done, I'm going to click the end the broadcast button. I'm going to put the music, and everybody's going to get the audio version of this. So Dave, why don't you finish this off with the tip?
This is just reeks of everything. In my book, Profit from Your Podcast, coming out next in September, here's a great tip. Put your sponsors in your private Facebook group. Then when it's time to renew the contract, go to your Facebook group. Hey, how many people have used the sponsor? And when all these hands go up and go, loved it, it was great, I used it, best product ever, you don't have to then third party the feedback. You've now turned your Facebook group into research for the sponsor. And when you walk in and go, hey, it's time to renew the contract, I've got the pen right here, it's really easy to get them to sign. And chances are that price might go up a little bit.